The first time I truly understood the fragility of happiness was the summer my sister, Chloe, told us she was pregnant. We were in the backyard of our childhood home, the scent of Dad's prize-winning roses hanging heavy in the humid Illinois air. Mom had just brought out a pitcher of iced tea, its sides beaded with condensation, and Chloe, her face a radiant mix of excitement and terror, had blurted it out. "I'm having a baby." The air crackled. Mom dropped the glass she was holding, a shattering crystal punctuation to the news. Dad, a stoic man who communicated more through engine grease than words, simply stared, his jaw working silently. And then, the dam broke. There were tears, laughter, and a flurry of questions. Chloe was 20, barely out of community college, and Mark, her husband of just over a year, stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders, a proud but slightly dazed look on his boyish face. I, Sarah, at 22, felt a complex knot tighten in my stomach. It was a tangle of pure, unadulterated joy for my little sister and a cold, slithering thread of something else, envy, perhaps, or the stark realization that our lives were diverging onto paths that would never again run parallel. Chloe was building a family. I was building a portfolio for a graphic design career that felt, in moments like this, frivolous and transient. That was June. By September, the initial shock had settled into a warm, expectant hum. Chloe's belly swelled, a perfect, round globe beneath her sundresses. She glowed with that preternatural light some pregnant women get, while Mark seemed to puff up with a proprietary pride that was both endearing and, to my critical eye, slightly cloying. He was a good man, a reliable man. He worked in sales, drove a sensible sedan, and had a handshake that could crack walnuts. He was everything my parade of artistic, emotionally unavailable boyfriends was not. Stable. My apartment lease had ended in August, and with Chloe needing help setting up the nursery and my freelance work allowing for flexibility, it made sense for me to move into their spare room for a few months. Their house was a modest, two-bedroom bungalow on a quiet, tree-lined street, a place that smelled of lemon polish and the slow-cooked meals Chloe loved to prepare. It was a home, something I craved but didn't yet possess. The dynamic shift was subtle at first. Chloe's energy, once boundless, began to wane. The pregnancy, while healthy, was draining. She suffered from intense morning sickness that lasted all day and a deep, bone-aching fatigue that sent her to bed by 8 most nights. Mark and I would often find ourselves in the living room after she'd retired, the silence between us filled only by the low murmur of the television. It was during these evenings that I began to see a different side of Mark. The proud, beaming expectant father facade began to show hairline fractures. He'd stare into his beer, his brow furrowed. "She's just different," he confessed one night during a commercial break for a football game. "It's all about the baby." Which it should be. I get that. But sometimes I feel like I'm just furniture. I offered the usual platitudes. "It's a big change for her, too, Mark." "It's temporary." He'd just nod, but his eyes held a loneliness that surprised me. I'd always seen him as so self-contained, so sure of his place in the world. Now, he seemed adrift. I became his confidant, the neutral party, the sister-in-law who could listen without the heightened emotions of a pregnant wife. It felt innocent, a way to help my sister by supporting her husband. The cracks widened as Chloe's due date approached. She became more withdrawn, her focus turning entirely inward, towards the life growing inside her. She snapped at Mark over trivial things, leaving a dish in the sink, forgetting to pick up her prescribed prenatal vitamins. He took it with a strained smile, but the frustration would simmer in his eyes later when we were alone. One Thursday night in late October, the tension reached a breaking point. I was in my room, sketching on my tablet, when I heard their raised voices through the wall. It wasn't the first argument, but it was the most visceral. "You don't even look at me anymore, Chloe. I'm just the guy who fetches you pickles and ice cream." Mark's voice was thick with hurt. "I'm growing a human being, Mark. My back is killing me. I haven't slept through the night in weeks, and all you can think about is your hurt feelings." Chloe's retort was a whip-crack of exhaustion and fury. The argument escalated, a torrent of pent-up resentments and fears. I heard a door slam, the bathroom, I thought, and then the heavy tread of Mark's footsteps down the hall. A few moments later, the front door opened and closed with a definitive thud. He'd left. I waited, my heart thudding against my ribs. After about 10 minutes, I crept out of my room. The house was silent. I went to close door and knocked softly. "Go away, Mark," came a muffled, tearful voice. "It's me, Chloe." "Sarah." A pause, then a quiet, "Come in." She was sitting up in bed, her face puffy and streaked with tears, her hands resting on her enormous belly. The sight of her, so vulnerable and strong at the same time, broke my heart. "He doesn't get it," she whispered. "He thinks this is easy for me." "I'm terrified," Sarah, what if I'm a terrible mother? What if this changes everything between us forever? I sat on the edge of the bed and held her, letting her cry it out. I was the big sister again, the protector. I reassured her, told her Mark was just scared, too, that they would find their way. I believed it. I had to. Mark didn't come back until after midnight. I heard his key in the lock, his careful, slightly unsteady steps as he moved through the dark house. I assumed he went to the couch. The thought of him sleeping there, exiled from his own bed, filled me with a strange, protective pity. I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, the digital clock on my nightstand glowed 2:17 a.m. My door was opening, a sliver of hallway light cutting across my floor. I sat up, my breath catching in my throat. It was Mark. He stood silhouetted in the doorway, his form bulky and uncertain. "Mark," I whispered, my voice rough with sleep. "What's wrong? Is it Chloe?" He didn't answer. He just stepped inside and closed the door behind him, plunging the room back into near darkness. My eyes adjusted, and I could see he was still in his jeans and t-shirt from earlier. He smelled of night air and whiskey. "She kicked me out," he slurred, his voice a low rumble. "Our bed told me I was being selfish." "I'm sorry," I said, pulling my comforter tighter around me. "She's just exhausted." "Mark, it's not you. It feels like it's me," he said, and the raw pain in his voice was a physical thing in the room. He took a step closer to the bed. "I feel so alone. Sarah, you're the only one who listens. You're the only one who sees me." A cold dread began to trickle down my spine. This was crossing a line. The confidences shared in the well-lit living room were one thing. This, in my dark bedroom in the middle of the night, was something else entirely. "Mark, you should go to the couch. We can talk in the morning." He ignored me. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping sharply with his weight. The proximity was alarming. I could feel the heat coming off his body. "I can't sleep out there," he muttered. "My mind is racing." Before I could protest, before I could even form a coherent thought, he was lying down, not on top of the covers, but under them, sliding his large body into the space beside me. I froze, every muscle locked in sheer, uncomprehending shock. "What are you doing?" I finally managed to gasp, scooting back until my spine pressed against the cold wall. "Mark, get out now." He turned onto his side, facing me. In the dim light, his eyes were dark, desperate pools. "Just let me lie here, Sarah, please. I need to not be alone for a little while. I won't do anything. I promise." His promise felt flimsy, a tissue paper shield against the terrifying reality of the situation. My brother-in-law was in my bed. My pregnant sister was sleeping in the room next door. My mind raced, a frantic hamster on a wheel. Do I scream? Wake Chloe? The image of her, heavily pregnant and stumbling into this scene, the devastation it would cause, it was unthinkable. It could send her into early labor. It would shatter her world. Do I push him? He was bigger, stronger, and drunk. A physical struggle could go very wrong, very fast. So, I made a choice, a decision born of pure, gut-wrenching fear for my sister's well-being. I decided on stillness, on silence. I would be a statue. I would let this moment pass, and in the morning, I would make him leave, and we would never, ever speak of it. It was a terrible, cowardly plan, but in that suffocating darkness, it was the only one I had. He didn't try to touch me at first. He just lay there, his breathing gradually slowing. I stayed rigid, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, praying for him to fall asleep. The minutes stretched into an eternity. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the hall clock, the sound of my own blood pounding in my ears. And then, he moved. It started with a hand on my arm, a heavy, warm weight. I flinched so violently the whole bed shook. "Please don't," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Shh," he murmured, his breath hot against my ear. "It's okay. I just need connection." His hand slid from my arm to my waist, pulling me gently, insistently, away from the wall. I was no match for his strength. He molded his body against my back, his chest to my spine, his knees tucked behind mine. He was holding me, a grotesque parody of a spooning couple. Tears began to leak from my eyes, hot and silent, soaking into my pillow. This was my sanctuary, my temporary room, and he was violating it. He was violating me. The weight of his arm across my waist was an anchor, dragging me down into a nightmare. "You're so good to me, Sarah," he whispered into my hair. "You understand me." "She doesn't anymore. It's like she's a different person." He was talking, a low, continuous stream of consciousness. He talked about his fears of fatherhood, his feeling of being replaced, his loneliness. He poured all of his insecurities into my ear, using my body as a receptacle for his pain. And all the while, he held me. His grip never tightened into violence. but it never relaxed into sleep either. It was a constant, unyielding presence. I dissociated. My mind left my body. I floated near the ceiling, looking down at the pathetic scene. The terrified woman frozen in the bed, the large, sad man clinging to her, the whole house a silent witness to this profound betrayal. I thought of Chloe, sleeping peacefully just a few feet away, trusting that the people she loved most were safe in their beds. The guilt was acid burning through my insides. Why didn't I scream? Why was I protecting him? I was protecting her. I told myself I was protecting the baby. The night wore on. He would occasionally shift, his hold adjusting, and each time a fresh wave of terror would wash over me. Once, he nuzzled his face into the back of my neck, and I thought I was going to be sick. But he never went further. It was a night of psychological torture, a slow drip poison of fear and helplessness. Eventually, the black outside my window began to soften to a deep, pre-dawn gray. Mark's breathing deepened into the regular rhythms of sleep. The arm around my waist grew heavier, more slack. He was finally asleep. As soon as I was sure, I began the slow, careful process of extricating myself. I lifted his arm, millimeter by millimeter, holding my breath. He grunted in his sleep but didn't wake. I slid out from under the covers, my body stiff and cold, and stood on shaking legs on the cold wooden floor. I looked at him, asleep in my bed, his face looking young and unguarded. A part of me felt that treacherous pity again, but a stronger, colder part felt nothing but a clean, sharp hatred. I gathered my phone, my charger, and my car keys. I didn't bother with clothes. I walked out of my room, down the hall, past Chloe's closed door. I didn't look at it. I couldn't. I went out the front door, into the chilly, liberating morning air, and got into my car. I drove to a 24-hour diner on the other side of town, and in a sticky vinyl booth, under the fluorescent lights, I finally let the silent sobs rack my body. I sat there for hours, nursing a cup of coffee I didn't drink, watching the sun rise. I had to go back. My stuff was there. Chloe was there. I had to face it. When I returned, it was after 9 a.m. The house was quiet. I walked in, my heart a frantic bird in a cage of ribs. Mark was in the kitchen, making coffee. He looked up as I entered. He was clean, dressed for work, but his eyes were bloodshot and shadowed with shame. "Sarah," he began, his voice low. "About last night." I held up a hand, my gaze cold and direct. "Don't. You will never speak of it. You will never come near me again. If you do, I will tell Chloe everything." He flinched as if I'd struck him. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it, nodding once, a quick, jerky motion. Just then, Chloe shuffled into the kitchen, yawning. She was wearing one of Mark's old t-shirts over her belly, her hair a messy halo. "Morning," she mumbled, smiling sleepily at both of us. I slept like a rock. "You guys have coffee on." The normalcy of it was gut-wrenching. She came over and gave me a one-armed hug. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I said, my voice miraculously steady. I met Mark's eyes over her head. His were pleading. I looked away. "I moved out that afternoon. I told Chloe I'd gotten a sudden, urgent project that required me to be back in my own space. I made up a story about a demanding new client." She was disappointed but understood. Mark helped me carry my boxes to the car, his movements stiff and formal. Our hands brushed as he handed me a box of books, and we both recoiled as if from a live wire. "Take care of my sister," I said to him, my voice devoid of all emotion. He just nodded, unable to meet my eyes. The following weeks were a special kind of hell. I threw myself into work, but the memory of that night was a stain on my mind. I talked to Chloe every day on the phone, listening to her updates about baby kicks and doctor's appointments, my stomach churning with a secret that felt like a physical illness. I was lying to her with every breath I took. I had become a co-conspirator in her husband's betrayal, not by action, but by inaction. Mark kept his distance. When I visited, he was polite, quiet, and made himself scarce. The easy camaraderie we'd once shared was gone, replaced by a chasm of unspoken horror. Chloe noticed the tension. "Of course. Is everything okay between you and Mark?" she asked me one day. A month later, we were assembling a crib in the nursery, a room now painted a soft yellow. "He seems so withdrawn around you lately." "It's fine," I said, forcing a smile as I tightened a screw. "I think he's just stressed. First-time dad jitters." She accepted the explanation, but I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. The lie was creating its own fissures. Chloe went into labor 3 weeks early. It was a frantic, terrifying phone call from Mark in the middle of the night. I met them at the hospital, my own anxiety a wild thing clawing at my throat. For 12 hours, I sat in the waiting room with Mark, the silence between us thick and suffocating. We were united in our fear for Chloe and the baby, but it was a fragile, hateful alliance. When a nurse finally came out to tell us that Chloe was fine and we had a healthy baby boy, The relief was so profound I thought my knees would buckle. Mark sank into a chair and wept, his face in his hands. For a moment, I saw only the scared, vulnerable man from my bedroom, and a confusing wave of pity mixed with my revulsion. We were allowed in to see her. Chloe was exhausted, pale, but radiant. In her arms was a tiny, swaddled bundle with a shock of dark hair. My nephew, Liam. I started to cry as I looked at him, this perfect, innocent creature. The tears were for him, for the complexity of the world he was entering, and for the terrible secret that now lived in the foundation of his family. I stayed for an hour, holding Liam, marveling at his tiny fingers, telling Chloe how amazing she was. Then I made my excuses, pleading exhaustion. Mark walked me to the elevator bank. The corridor was quiet, sterile. When the elevator doors pinged open, he put a hand on my arm to stop me. I froze, every muscle going rigid. "Sarah," he said, his voice raw. "I am so sorry for that night. It was the biggest mistake of my life. I was drunk and scared and I took advantage of your kindness. I will never forgive myself." I looked at him, at the genuine torment in his eyes. The anger I had nurtured for weeks suddenly felt heavy, a burden I no longer wanted to carry. It wasn't forgiveness. That was a long way off, if it ever came. But it was an understanding. He was a flawed man who had done a terrible, weak thing. "You have a son now, Mark," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Your job is to be a better man for him and for Chloe. This secret dies with us. It protects them. But if you ever make me question that decision, all bets are off." He nodded, his shoulders slumping in what looked like both shame and relief. "I will, I promise." I stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, I saw him turn and walk back towards the room where his wife and newborn son waited for him. I never told Chloe. Liam is 2 years old now, a bright, laughing toddler who calls me Auntie Sasha. Chloe is a wonderful, if sometimes overwhelmed, mother. Mark is a devoted, if overly cautious, father. From the outside, they are the picture of a happy, young family. And I am the doting aunt, the reliable sister. I come for dinners, I babysit, I celebrate birthdays. But the ghost of that night is always there, a thin, cold pane of glass between me and them. I look at my sister, so trusting and happy, and the guilt is a stone in my pocket, a weight I have learned to carry. I look at Mark, and I see the shadow of his shame in the careful way he avoids being alone with me. The choice I made that night was born of fear, a desperate attempt to protect my sister from a pain that would have shattered her. But protection built on a lie is a fragile thing. It has